I am here with my friend Adam. Hello, Adam.
How you doing, Andy?
I'm not too bad. The cold is diminishing, which is good. So I'm very happy about that. How are you?
It has been a deep freeze here. I have flown from California, where I live, back to Colorado, where I was at for 30 years. It was 10 below zero Fahrenheit when I got in on Monday night. So it has been cold, cold, cold here.
Hey, at least you're not warm cold. So
At least I'm not warm coat. I'm straight up cold. Yeah,
it's
exactly.
easier to process, isn't it?
It's always something.
Cool. Right. Adam is from Plugged in the US. You're based offices around the world, but you do all sorts of reviews. And what's really
Yep.
interesting about those reviews, it isn't just this is a brilliant movie because Leonardo DiCaprio entered the room aesthetically. Actually,
Right.
it's much more about whether you want to think, is this suitable for me, for my children? And that's what I love about these reviews.
Yep.
So what have you got for us today then, sir?
We've got an interesting group of things to talk about. We do focus on movies, so I want to throw one your way that it may be under the radar enough that it may or may not be showing over there, but it stars Elizabeth Tabish, who of course is Mary Magdalene in the Chosen series. And this movie is called Between Borders, and it's set about the time of the fall of the USSR. And she plays a woman named Violetta, and she's of Armenian descent, but she lives in Azerbaijan. And of course, when the Soviet Union collapsed, a lot of those states became their own countries again. And it's the story of her family's attempt to escape persecution because of their Armenian background, when they essentially lost the protection of the Soviet Union, which, interestingly, I think one of the collateral benefits of the Soviet Union was there were people who maybe escaped that sort of ethnic and religious persecution because of the secular nature of the state. So this is an interesting movie. I think if people like biographical stories, we find out how she and her family ultimately emigrated to the United States. But I thought it was a fascinating movie, and just to look at her life. And excuse me, Elizabeth Tabish is a fantastic actress. If you haven't seen her in The Chosen, you're in for a treat if you happen to see this movie.
Oh, okay, brilliant. What's the rating for that one?
I believe it's PG-13 here. Yeah, PG-13. So, and probably on the lighter end of the PG-13. So it might be, what is yours? You could do 12 and 15. Is that right over there?
Do you know, I looked this up the other day. I went onto a very well-known information website and I scrolled through, and the amount of flexibility, should we call it, of UPG 12, 15, PG-13 in the States and all the rest of it. Let's just say there's a lot of it. And if you're not quite sure,
Yes.
go and Google it.
Okay. Fair
There's,
enough. Fair
there's a
enough.
lot. Because then you've got, well, PG in the UK is not the same as PG-13, and then you've
Right.
got different countries who've got different standards on what's okay and what's not. So
Yep.
it's not even as simple as a straight, it's a PG. Oh, it must be okay because it's a PG-13. Check it out.
Well,
So,
and the interesting thing, and this is a little bit of a tangent, but it's kind of the fun of the show, is I love talking with you because you're in a different culture. And, we're both English speaking countries. There's a shared heritage there. But the European value system in general, and this may be more continental Europe than Great Britain, is just different. On the whole, there's a much greater acceptance of sexual imagery and maybe a much lower tolerance of violence. Whereas in the United States, it's violence galore, but we still get accused of being puritanical, with regard to sexuality. And it's interesting to me how different cultures place different values on content concerns, because they're not all the same.
no, I was in France about 30 years ago watching TV, mainstream TV around 6,
Yeah.
6:30 of an evening. So dinner time, family time. There was an
Yep.
advert after the news, okay? And in this advert, I can only describe it as pornography with a
Yeah.
half-naked woman who was by naked on an advert. I mean, she actually wasn't having any clothes and you could see all that you needed to see. And I'm thinking, this is mainstream. I was just shocked
Yep.
because I just thought I can't comprehend that she's actually fully nude in an
Yep.
advert, 6:30, and the family are there just eating their soup. just completely
Right.
oblivious. And I'm there, a mouth aghast, thinking, this is okay. Did I miss when this became okay?
Right. And it could be that the British sensibilities are still more in line maybe with American stuff,
I would think so.
with regard to that issue. I don't think that you guys have fully nude advertisements over there just
No.
yet, but Germany and France and, so much of continental Europe, it's just, there are different concerns. And I think one of the things that we try to do at Plugged In is we let you know about it. And I think trying to dig into things from a biblical worldview in terms of why should you be concerned about sexual content? Why should you be concerned about violence that maybe desensitizes our souls in different ways? So those are the kind of issues that we talk about in our reviews, among other things.
Which is what we like about Plugged In, because you're not doing, as I said, the normal standard movie review or CD review. Or what you're saying is, look, this is the content in it which you might need to consider if you've got
Yep.
younger children or someone who's
Yep.
got a particular sensitivity. We see it, don't we? If there's a film, I don't know, trying to think of one. They've all gone out of my head. Julie Roberts, where she was a DV victim.
Yeah.
There's warnings on that one that you might find disturbing, and we kind of put those warnings out. But
Yep.
then we miss some of the other stuff that actually would be equally problematic for some of us.
Well, and the thing about ratings, you talked about how they're flexible. In the United States, a PG-13, typically you can get away with two F words. But if it's more than that, and there are a couple weird exceptions, but as a general rule, if it's three or more, it's an automatic R for restricted rating. But you can have as many S words as you want. And so there's a part of me that's like, okay, I think I would probably call the F word a harsher word than the S word, but how do you weigh? Like, you could have 100 S words in a PG-13 movie, but only two F words. It's totally arbitrary,
Yeah.
right? And you could have an R-rated movie that just tiptoes into R-rated territory that might, on balance, have a lot less content than a PG-13 one that sort of skates under the line. So it's important to do your research, and I'm sure there are some of those semi-arbitrary things, with your rating systems too, because you got to draw the line somewhere, but the lines get drawn in weird places. So we have to do our own homework.
We do. Hence Plugged In. What else have you got?
A couple of months ago, I think it was back in late October, I wrote a blog, and we have a blog that's sort of our catch-all for other things that don't neatly fit necessarily a review category. We talk about trends, we talk about technology, and I talked about a new word that has been bubbling up in our online parlance called dream scrolling. You've probably heard of doom scrolling, which is sort of, we're scrolling through all the bad news all the time. Dream scrolling is kind of the opposite. It is looking at images of things that we want that we think will make our life better. So maybe that's a vacation in Bali. Maybe that's, sure could use a new Aston Martin. Never mind that I don't have an old Aston Martin. I have a friend who has an Aston Martin, and I'm waiting for him to let me take it for a spin one of these days. But it's I think it's interesting that we have a word for it, and I think it's indicative of our desire to escape. And so even though we're not fixating necessarily on those doom scrolling things, just asking that question, what does it do to our souls when we're constantly fixated on something online that we think if we had it, oh, if I just had that, my life would be complete, right? And so even if it's not that destructive thing, and even if it's not necessarily problematic like a pornographic image, there still may be a cost to our soul in terms of contentment, right? Because if all I'm doing is focusing on what I don't have, I'm probably not going to be growing in contentment as a Christian. So if you do a search on the phrase dream scrolling, you can find that blog that I wrote. I think it was back in late October.
Cool. Yeah, we do need to be content with what we have. And if we're
Yes.
not content with what we have, then we will never be content. And
Yep.
wanting what we can't afford, it's right there. 10 Commandments, Old Testament. Don't go after what you can't get because you won't be happy.
Yep.
Pretty much. What else have we got then, Seth?
Well, we review YouTube channels, and obviously with YouTube, you can't necessarily cover everything. But a couple weeks ago, we talked about the YouTube channel How Ridiculous. And this is actually feeling familiar to me. Did we talk about this last week
Yeah, yeah,
by
yeah.
chance?
Yeah,
Did
you did.
we?
Yeah.
Okay, well, let's do something totally different then.
Okay.
Um, See, my mind gets in a rut, and there it goes. I will go in a totally different direction if you want to just pitch that to me again.
Go for it. What's next then, sir?
There's a show, and it is over on, I believe, Apple TV Plus that has been getting a lot of buzz. And that show is called Severance. Have you heard about this show?
No, I haven't.
So this is a TVMA, and of course we have a totally different rating system for television
Of course.
to further muddy the waters. And in the United States, another fun fact on rating, with movies, it's an independent rating board. With television shows, it's self-rated, which you can see why people are maybe motivated to blur the boundaries a little bit.
Yeah.
So important to know. This is a show that stars actor Adam Scott, and it's an interesting premise. It's a sci-fi show that this guy works at this company that they essentially split somebody's at-work personality from their going home personality. And it's sort of a security measure so that when they're at home, they don't remember anything about their work life. And when they're at work, they don't remember anything about their life outside of work. And you can imagine how that would create conundrums. And it kind of has it's not Blade Runner, but it sort of has that feel of this, dystopian. What do we do with all of the problems that this creates? It's in its second season. It's M-rated. There's a fair bit of language. The sexual stuff, at least so far, is more suggestive than really just outright explicit. But it really is playing with identity, right? And one of the guys has lost his wife, and when he's not working, he just thinks about having lost his wife all the time. And so he signs up for this because he's like, well, at least at work, if I do this, I won't remember how much I'm mourning my wife when I'm not at work. So it's an interesting show. It's a rather disturbing show. But that one is streaming on Apple TV Plus.
It's an interesting one, though, isn't it? Because we do try and, as a rule, we have our work personality and our home personality.
Yep.
I think that's definitely changed in the last 20 years. So when I worked in an office like 25 years ago, you wouldn't talk about stuff at home. It just wasn't normal.
Right.
When you were in the office, you were in the office to get the job done. Whereas now my wife's working in an office and she's saying, wow, these people, are they going to get any work done? Because they're just sort of chattering and nattering.
Right.
And yes, they are getting the job done, but there is definitely a change in the last 20, 25, 30 years where we went to work as opposed to now where we go to work and to socialize. So it's kind of blending. I know it's kind of the US UK work ethic might be different, but I don't know that this bit is, which is we're sort of blending friendship and work.
Yes.
But the problem, of course, is if it's a friend, well, you're being paid to be in the same room as them. So is that really a friendship? It's more of a companionship, maybe. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, and I think the great thing about entertainment is it can serve as a catalyst for these conversations. And I'm not saying that you should necessarily go and start streaming the show straight away, but I think that it is dealing with that sort of work-life balance, and that conversation is all over. Again, you've got, it might be France or Germany. One of those countries is trying to, think about a 4-day work week. And is this going to work? And we're trying to figure out, how do we keep it all under control? Whereas, as you mentioned, it seems like previous generations, there was a hard compartmentalization and you didn't talk about any of that stuff. So I would say it's similar in the US. Things are really different now than they would have been a couple of decades ago.
For better or for worse, we will leave for you to decide for yourselves when you're listening to this. Have you got one more for us?
We do. We have the new song APT, which is by an Australian Korean singer named Rose or Rosie, depending on what she's calling herself, and Bruno Mars. Have you seen this one? Because there's a little dance that goes with it.
No, but I know Bruno Mars. That's a name I do know.
So this thing has just blown up because they do the dance with it. And it basically stems from a drinking game in Korea. And they made a little song and dance about it. And it's an innocuous song for the most part. Bruno's got a couple lines and I'm like, Bruno, do you have to make everything naughty, really? And it's not terribly naughty, but just ever so slightly. Um, and we review tracks and albums each week. But I think the more interesting thing with the rise of social media is that a song, especially if it's a catchy pop song and it's got a little dance that goes with it, it's like custom made for TikTok and world domination. And so she's got like close to 1 billion views on this song in just a few weeks. And it is taking the world by storm. So you can find our review of APT, or apartment is what it's short for, at pluggedin.com.
Adam Holz from pluggedin.com. Thank you very much for your time, and we will be back next week for more.
We will do it. Thanks, Andy.
Pure 24/7 radio is listener supported, which means we are free, online and always pure because of the generous support of our listeners. If you would like to contribute financially, please visit pure247radio.org. If you'd like to find out how we use your money, please visit the Our Cost section. Any donation of any size will help keep us on air and broadcasting for free. Thank you.